Hi, welcome back to Candid Corporate Conversations with Kenesha Hart, CEO of Confident You. I'm excited to be back with you today to talk candidly about what goes on in corporate America, specifically affecting us as women. And today, I want to talk to you about what I call behavioral double standards. Now, you may or may not have ever heard of that term before, but behavioral double standards are strictly how women behave and how men behave in the workplace, but the double standard that is applied to the exact same behavior between the two genders. And ladies, this is negatively impacting us and our ability to grow and change the workplace in which we are all working every single day. So today I want to, and I will talk from an article that I found in the New York Times. And the name of the article is The Future of Work, A Seat at the Head of the Table. The article is written by Emily Bazelon. I hope I said that correctly. And today I'm going to read a little bit from the article. So I just want to give you that heads up before we start, because the article confirmed information for me that I had learned about years ago, have talked to various mentors in my life about, but the fact that behavioral double standards exist and how we identify those, how we address those, and how we ultimately want to eradicate those. But ladies, you are dealing with it. I deal with it in corporate America every single day. And it's not okay. Because when we act a certain way and our male counterparts act the exact same way, but we're held to a different standard or we're perceived differently than they are, then that sets us back. It doesn't give us the same opportunity that our male counterparts have, and it puts us in often a negative light. And so we're going to talk through that today, and then we're going to talk about just one or two ways that we can get better and we can start to, as I said, eradicate this problem. So let's dive in. So first and foremost, I want to give you some examples from the article that I thought were spot on to just give you an understanding about when I talk about behavioral double standards, what some of those behaviors are and how they are perceived differently for women versus men. And probably you already know what some of those are, but let's talk through them. So first, one of them is when women are warm and nurturing in the workplace. Often we are perceived as not being ready to move into leadership positions. Or if we're already in a leadership position, then we are perceived as only being able to go so far, or only being able to manage a certain group of people. Maybe it's just frontline individuals, or maybe it's majority female teams. Because the warm and nurturing side that is exhibited by women oftentimes causes us to be perceived as soft leaders, which translates to not as effective and can't drive results as well as our male counterparts. However, if a male is warm and nurturing, he's considered to be a strong leader, to have adapted and grown skill set necessary to create and foster great relationships. Women are doing the same thing, but again, the perception is different. Behavioral double standard. The next thing is when women take charge, when we get things done, when we push, when we drive results, when we drive a conversation, when we drive toward a finish line. Instead of being considered assertive, which even that word is used only for women, if you think about it, how often do you hear men described as assertive? And so that's the nice word that people now use instead of aggressive, unless people want to use that word. But women are considered assertive or aggressive and often perceive that translates to being angry. However, if a male is driving, pushing for things to get done, taking charge, stepping up, taking initiative, then he's perceived as that's what he's supposed to do. And there's no aggressive, angry, or assertive title added to him as a descriptor. Think about that. I'm sure many of you all can relate. That is a behavioral double standard, simply. I'll give you another one that the article pointed out that I thought was very interesting. It talked about when women negotiate salary. And so I'm going to read this part to you. In one study from 2003, the starting salaries of men graduating from business school were $4,000 higher on average than those of women graduating from the same program. Other research has replicated this kind of finding. The implication could be that women get what they settle for, as an article in the Harvard Business Review puts it. And if women did negotiate, the assumption is that the gender wage gap would go away. But research also shows that when women bargain over salary, they get paid more, but at a social cost. Why would it be at a social cost? One would wonder, right? And that is because what happens is another study confirmed that information. And it said that the article says in another study, when women negotiated their salaries, other people were less willing to work with them, though they didn't feel the same way about men who negotiated their salaries. So it goes to, again, a behavioral double standard, women asking for what they want, being not even assertive, just doing what is smart business in asking, negotiating a salary at any job. And people don't want to work with them as much as they do with men who do the exact same thing. And again, it's a social issue, but it's a perception issue, and it all comes down to a behavioral double standard, right? And so those are things that we are fighting against, and it is perception that people have of women that gets attached to them that holds us back in corporate America, as the article says, right? Trying to get us a seat at the head of the table, and we're stifled by these social constructs that are attached to women that are not attached to men, although our actions and words are the exact same, but two completely different perceptions attached to those actions and those words. Last thing, intelligent women are perceived differently than intelligent men. And the article talked about a study that was done where women and men took a test, and the women who scored higher, although they were considered experts, they were not influential. They were considered less influential. And the women who were not considered experts because they scored lower on the test were considered more influential. To me, that speaks of intimidation and the fact that it's perceived that intelligent women are, again, pushy and not liked. And is that intimidation from men? Is that intimidation from other women, or both? Whereas women who are not as smart, and in this situation strictly based on the testing that was done, then because they don't pose a threat, then they have more influence. People are more willing to work with them. Whereas the men who scored higher on that test and were considered experts, they had the most influence. So whereas it should be that both men and women who scored high on the test should have had the most influence because their scores reflect that they have the most knowledge in the group, women who were the experts, did not have as much influence because of a number of reasons. The article didn't really say exactly, but I would propose that it's the intimidation factor. Women are not supposed to be as smart, or we expect a lower level of intelligence or thinking or critical thinking from a woman. And when she exhibits that, a much higher level than we're accustomed to, we just don't like her. That is not going to help us in corporate America. It's not going to help us in life in general, because although we're talking about corporate America and the impacts that different things have for women in corporate America and talking candidly about that, that's why started Candid Conversations based on events in corporate America. This applies across life, right? Because it impacts our relationships and our community service and our work in our churches and our interactions with friends and interactions at networking events. When you're dealing with the behavioral double standard, women are perceived differently than men. Although that is fact and truth, we have got to figure out how we start to eradicate it. And it's our issue that we have to eradicate. It's not our issue that it exists, partially. I'll get to that in a second. But because it impacts us, we have to do the work to fix it. And so let me double back really quickly when I just said we are partially the problem. So I want you to think about this. As women, we also have these perceptions, right? And I know that's hard to admit. I know that is difficult to swallow, but I want you to be very honest with yourself. And I want you to think about when you've had conversations or interacted, whether it's in a group setting or in one-on-one, with a woman, a fellow female colleague, versus a male. And the woman was very persistent with what she wanted to communicate as being done or her expectations, that type of thing. Versus when you've been in the same type of conversation with a male. And I want you to think about, did you feel a tremor of dislike toward that woman because of how pushy she was or assertive she was? And did you feel the exact same way about the male? Or did you just shrug off the male because he is a male? I would have to say, I can admit, I've had to check myself and know that if I've had a conversation with a woman who is very matter of fact, very clear on what she wants, and I'm very much the same way, that I have to not take that as her being abrasive and not expect her to be kind and gentle with her words. And if she's not, that I take a dislike to that, either to her actions or even her, because I don't do the same with men. I just think this is what they do. This is how they are. But that is not helpful to my fellow female counterparts. And so I challenge you to ask yourself, have you done the same? Because although we have to fix the male perception that sees women differently from men, even though they're doing the exact same thing, saying the exact same words, we as females contribute to that as well. And so we have to fix our perceptions first alongside, right? Like we can't all get it fixed and wait on them, but we have to fix our perceptions as well. Because if we are attributing our fellow female colleague with attributes of dislike or hesitancy or space because we don't like the fact that she knows what she wants, she's matter of fact, she doesn't bite her tongue, she's pushing for things, then we are perpetuating the perception and the behavioral double standard that's causing the problem. So we have to check ourselves, fix ourselves, so that we can become proponents, not just for ourselves, but for our fellow female colleagues. So then the idea is, how do we get this fixed, right? And how do we eradicate this problem? So a couple of things. I'm only going to give you two. There's not a litany or a long list of ways to fix this. This is one of those things that starts small, grassroots, and will eventually build. It is a topic of conversation, obviously, as I was able to find an article on the topic from the New York Times, right? People are aware, but there's not enough conversation going on. There's not enough awareness, and there's not enough honesty for people to say, women and men alike, to say, yes, I subscribe to this. Yes, I do that, consciously or unconsciously. And the only way that we're going to identify the unconscious is by actually consciously thinking about and evaluating, do we do this? Do I perceive my fellow female colleagues differently when they interrupt me in a meeting than I do a male? 9 times out of 10, we do. Do I expect my female colleagues to be kind in their words to me when they are giving me a directive or giving me feedback, but I don't have that same expectation from a male counterpart? Or even if I have the same expectation, if the delivery is still brisk and to the point and blunt, do I receive it differently or do I walk out having the same likability for my female counterpart as I do my male? And oftentimes I would have to say that that's probably not the case. You check yourself, you know yourself, but we need to start there in order to start at the grassroots, person by person, in order to start bringing this conversation to light and to start changing what the reality currently is now. So how do we do that? First, starting at the company level. So companies need to support this change by making jobs more appealing for women. And what I mean by that, I'll give you an example. The article speaks about a company that was advertising for a position, and the position mentioned a ninja coder who wrestles problems to the ground. Now, when you hear that, who comes to mind? For me, it's a guy in a black ninja outfit with the belt tied, and he is doing kung fu or whatever other options there are in the martial arts, and then wrestling something to the ground. That's the physical image that comes to mind. But the problem with that is the advertisement is for a coder. Women code, right? But by the descriptor created by the company, it's almost geared toward men automatically. And so how can a woman ever step into that role and then begin to grow if it's never a role that she would get? Because she would never apply for it. Because she would think they're looking for a male, or that's a male role, simply based on the description that the company used to advertise the position. So for companies, my one tip for correcting is to make jobs more appealing to women so that the number of women in positions in your company can increase. And let me clarify that or add another layer to that. The women in leadership positions can increase, because that's not, when I talk about a job description such as that, I'm not just talking about the initial introductory job into the company, but the job for the next promotion level in the company. Is it worded for women to think, I can see myself in that position, right? Because only as women begin to grow, more women begin to grow, and we begin to equal out our leadership positions to our male counterparts, will we then have more women who see other leaders who look like them in place and say, I can be there too. And then we also have women in those leadership positions to say, I can pull someone else up with me. And that way we can increase the number of women that are in those positions. And the more we have, the more exposure our male counterparts and likewise female counterparts have to how we work, how we behave, so that those conversations to understand and accept that become more norm. But you have to have the women in place in order for that to happen. It also comes down to recruiting. And I'll use this example just because it is in my own personal world, but companies need to do a better job of, in their appeal to women, recruiting for women. And so that means recruiting in spaces where women are, right? So what does that look like? That also looks like going to the all-female colleges or looking at organizations and communities where women are and making sure advertising dollars, recruitment dollars are spent there. The example I'll give is that reflective of recruiting specifically is that for my company, one of the places that we just began recruiting was in historically Black colleges and universities. And that just happened, I believe, last year was the first year in, I don't know if it's the company's history, but I want to say it definitely hasn't happened many, many prior years. But that's really interesting because I live in a city where historically Black colleges and universities are very prominent, and some of the most prominent historically Black universities and colleges exist. And so, in order for my company to do a better job of diversifying their workplace and what it looks like, it would only make sense for them to recruit in a place where you have a diverse population that is different from what the majority of your population looks like currently at your job. That is an example of companies proactively recruiting a diverse population, whether it's women or it's minorities, in order to level the playing field and to give equal opportunity for the workplace to not adhere to things such as behavioral double standards. Because you have people working side by side who are different from each other, who have to collaborate, who then have to learn how to work together. It's so easy for us to want to be around in the space of people who are similar to us. But when we do that, then we don't ever expand our knowledge or expand our understanding of how other people work, how they experience the workplace, what their experience is like, and how we react to that, right? And that, again, goes back to the behavioral double standard. The women and men, we as women are acting the exact same way as men in certain situations, saying the exact same thing, but the experience is different for the receiver because one is considered aggressive and the other one is considered normal, right? And so the only way that we start to improve that is by people working together, communicating, talking about these things, identifying when they happen, and then collaborating on how do we change this. So for companies, that is one way to improve, start to improve the behavioral double standards that exist, start to eradicate them, is that they need to appeal more to women for jobs that typically would be male oriented, or people would think are male oriented, and they need to proactively recruit women to bring them into the company, proactively recruit them to step into leadership roles, right? Because that molding and that mentoring can happen if necessary in those roles, but you've got to get the women in those roles. So that's what companies can do. What can we as individuals do? As individuals, two things. Find a support system of people, individuals that you can talk to about this problem and that you guys can work together to, one, better understand the problem, two, make sure that there's not behavioral double standards occurring within your group, and then three, when you have and encounter those behavioral double standards, that you have a support group that you can go back to, talk about, understand, get feedback on how to better handle or how to have a conversation with the individuals that apply that double standard. The second way is to find, and this is specific, find a man who can support you. So ladies, I'm telling you that because the only one of the ways that we are going to eradicate this behavioral double standard is by educating men that it's happening. Often they're not aware. It's unconscious or subconsciously occurring, and they need to have someone point it out to them consciously that it's occurring so that conversation can happen. They can start to understand, they can start to accept, and then they can start to advocate on our behalf. And so ideally it would be a mentor and a sponsor. I'm sorry. So ideally it would be a mentor and a sponsor, one and the same. But if you can't find someone to be a mentor and a sponsor, then you want him to be a sponsor. And just a quick synopsis of what those two are and the differences, and that will be a session, a candid conversation that we'll have at another time. But a mentor is someone who has knowledge and experience either in your industry or your area, or maybe not, but who has experience that they can give you guidance and help you figure out how to better handle things. A sponsor is someone who has what I like to call credibility in the workplace and leverage in the workplace, meaning that if there was a position open, they have leverage to be able to get your name in the door or to get you that job. They're an advocate for you in the workplace to help you grow and be promoted in the workplace. Grow meaning they may be able to help you get on project teams, or they may be able to help you work in a different department or shadow in a different department or do cross-functional work so that you get more exposure and more experience in a particular area. Or like I said, they have that credibility and leverage within the company because of who they are and their influence that they can help you to get a job. That's a sponsor. And that's who you really want if you can't get a mentor and a sponsor, because then your sponsor is coming to understand the challenge that you're dealing with the behavioral double standards when you are speaking up for yourself, when you are pushing to get things done, and they can, because they have more influence and leverage in the company, then they can be a louder, more effective voice for you in what you're doing and how you're trying to grow than maybe a mentor. So the second way that we're going to eradicate this is have a male in your life and that you can work with, talk to, get support from, get guidance from, who can leverage for you movement in your company, and you can help them understand what this behavioral double standard is and how it's applying and impacting you, educate them if they're not aware, or help them or have them help you to navigate situations where it does occur. And so that is how we can start to eradicate the behavioral double standards that we deal with. And this is not going to take just a few weeks or a few months to fix. It is going to take a long time because we're dealing with perceptions. As I said earlier, we as women have to deal with our own perceptions because, again, I challenge you, what perceptions do you have of a woman who is forthright, who is not all warm and fuzzy, or who is warm and fuzzy? Do you take that as inept or not as competitive in her job, the warm and fuzzy, as somebody who's not? Or do you take the forthright woman who strictly wants to talk about business as aggressive or assertive, right? And not likable. So we have to address our own perceptions and our own double standards that we apply to our fellow female colleagues, as well as help our male colleagues to see it, understand it, accept it, and then collaborate with them on how to improve it. So that is what I wanted to talk with you guys today about in our Candid Corporate Conversations. It is a tricky, difficult area, but it is a reality in our corporate America. And like I said, it exists all over, but it definitely hinders us as ladies in corporate America. But we are the ones who have got to identify it, call it out, help people understand it, make sure that we aren't participating, and then take steps to eradicate behavioral double standards that impact our ability to grow and have a seat at the head table in whatever capacity that means for you in corporate America. Thank you for joining me today. I will look forward to seeing you next time for our Candid Corporate Conversations by Confident You. Bye.